Chapter 1. I spent years paying for my family's life, their house, their bills, their emergencies, believing that made me a mother they would never walk away from. Then, one quiet afternoon, a single message told me I was no longer welcome at their table. I am Margaret Hale, 69 years old, and this is the moment I realized I was never family to them, only the one who paid. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Eugene, Oregon. The house is small but orderly, the kind of place that keeps its routines even when the people inside have slowed down. That afternoon moved the way most of my afternoons do. Slowly. Predictably. I had already taken the chicken out of the oven, set it on the counter to rest, and wiped my hands on a dish towel that has been washed thin over the years. The kitchen smelled warm and familiar. Rosemary, butter, something comforting enough that I did not think about it. I had learned to enjoy that time of day. The hours before evening settle in when the light shifts and the world outside seems to lower its voice. I poured myself a glass of water, stood at the sink, and watched the last of the daylight slip through the trees behind the house. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt wrong. Then my phone vibrated against the counter. It was a small sound, easy to miss, but I noticed it right away. I always do. I glanced at the screen, expecting nothing more than a reminder or a grocery app notification I had forgotten to turn off. Instead, I saw my son's name, Andrew. For a moment, I did not touch the phone, not because I was afraid of what it might say, but because I had learned that even ordinary messages can carry weight if they arrive at the wrong moment. I picked it up anyway. The message was short, direct, almost careful in the way people are careful when they think efficiency is kindness. He told me that I would not be joining them for dinner that weekend. He said his wife Claire was not comfortable with me being there, that it would be easier this way. There was no apology, no explanation beyond that, no suggestion that we talk later, no question asking how I felt about it. The words sat on the screen like they had always belonged there. I read the message once, then again. I waited for the feeling I assumed would come. The rush of anger, the sting of humiliation, the need to respond quickly to correct something that had clearly gone wrong. None of that happened. Instead, I felt something quieter, a hollow kind of stillness, as if a chair had been pulled out from under a habit I did not realize I was still leaning on. I did not type anything back. I did not call him. I did not even sigh. I simply placed the phone face down on the counter and stood there listening to the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. What hurt was not the missed dinner. I had eaten alone plenty of times. I had grown used to that. What hurt was the ease of it, the way the decision had already been made, discussed, finalized without a single thought given to my place in it. I was not being argued with. I was being edited out. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a moment. Images rose up without being invited. A holiday party last winter where I had arrived early and ended up sitting near the window while everyone else gathered around the table. A birthday dinner where conversation stopped when I tried to add something then resumed without me. The way my suggestions had slowly turned into interruptions. I had noticed these things at the time. I told myself they were small, that families change as children grow older, that I was lucky to still be included at all. I told myself not to be sensitive. That word had followed me for years, delivered with smiles and soft voices that suggested it was a flaw I should manage quietly. Standing there in my kitchen, I realized that what I had been calling sensitivity was simply awareness. I picked up my plate and carried it to the table. I sat down and ate a few bites without tasting anything. The food was fine. It always was. I just did not feel hungry anymore. The phone did not buzz again. No follow-up. No check-in. The silence felt deliberate, like a door that had been closed gently so it would not make a sound. I wondered briefly if I should say something, ask a question, explain how this made me feel. Then I thought about all the times I had already done that. All the careful conversations that ended with me apologizing for bringing something up at all. All the reassurances that things were not meant the way I took them. I had learned my part well. After dinner, I cleared the table and washed the dishes. I dried them and put them away in their usual places. The routine steadied me. There is comfort in order when something inside you has shifted. When the kitchen was clean again, I walked down the hallway to the small room at the back of the house that I rarely entered unless I needed something specific. The light there was dimmer, filtered through a narrow window that faced the side yard. I reached into the bottom drawer of the old filing cabinet and pulled it open. Inside were folders I had not looked at in months, years in some cases. Bank statements, loan documents, copies of checks, notes written in my own handwriting, reminders to follow up to send money to make sure everything was covered. I sat on the edge of the bed and spread a few of them out in front of me. The paper felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it represented, but because of how long it had been there, waiting without complaint. As I flipped through the pages, I did not feel anger. I felt recognition. These were the quiet ways I had stayed connected, the ways I had made myself useful, necessary. I had told myself that this was what support looked like, that this was how families took care of each other. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what would happen if I did not. The question formed slowly, without accusation or drama. It simply settled in my mind, clear and steady. If I stopped, what would change? I gathered the papers back into their folders and slid the drawer closed. The sound was soft, almost polite. I turned off the light and walked back to the kitchen. The house felt the same as it always had. Quiet, intact, but something in me had shifted its weight. I picked up my phone once more and looked at the message from my son. I did not respond. I set the phone down where I could see it and walked into the living room where the evening light had finally faded. There would be time to remember how things used to be, time to examine the years I had spent explaining myself away. For now, I sat in the stillness and let it settle. The past was waiting, and for the first time, I was ready to look at it without trying to fix it. Chapter 2. What I did not expect once I allowed myself to stop fixing things was how much of my life came rushing forward on its own. 30 years is a long time to share a life with someone, long enough that the memories stop lining up neatly and start overlapping one moment bleeding into the next. I met my husband Robert when we were both still learning how to be adults. We built a life that made sense to us. He was steady practical, the kind of man who read contracts twice and kept old receipts in labeled envelopes. I was the one who balanced the accounts planned ahead and made sure nothing slipped through the cracks. It worked because we trusted each other. When Robert died in 2018, the quiet that followed felt different from any silence I had known before. Not empty exactly, just unfinished. I handled the arrangements, the paperwork, the accounts because that was what I had always done. People told me how strong I was. I did not feel strong. I felt competent. There is a difference. After the funeral, my son Andrew came by more often. He sat at my kitchen table, drank coffee he barely touched, and talked about how things were going with the house, the kids, the bills. His wife Claire joined sometimes, her phone always face down beside her mug, her attention divided. I listened. I offered help when it seemed appropriate. It felt natural. Families take care of each other. In 2016, Andrew and Claire found a house they loved but could not quite afford. The market was moving fast, they said. If they missed this one, who knew when another would come along? I transferred $135,000 for the down payment without much hesitation. Robert and I had talked about helping our children someday. This felt like that someday. 2 years later, after Robert was gone, Andrew came to me again. He had an idea for a small service business. He had done the research, he said. He just needed a push to get started. I gave him $25,000. He hugged me longer than usual that day and told me I was the reason he could do this. In 2019, there was paperwork. Andrew suggested it would be easier if he could help manage some things for me. Power of attorney, he called it, just in case. He smiled when he said it, and I smiled back because it seemed practical. I signed the papers. It felt like another small way of staying useful. From then on, the support became routine. I paid a few bills here and there, covered a shortfall, sent money when something unexpected came up. Between 2019 and 2024, I spent somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000 a year helping them stay afloat. I never tracked it closely. I did not need to. I had enough. That was what I told myself. Sitting on the edge of my bed with those folders spread out in front of me, I began to notice the patterns I had ignored. The checks I wrote without being asked twice. The transfers that went through without a thank you. The way help had quietly turned into expectation. I picked up a receipt and turned it over in my hands. On the back, in Robert's handwriting, was a note I had forgotten about. Emergency fund separate. Do not touch unless necessary. I traced the letters with my finger and felt a sharp ache in my chest. He had always thought ahead. About everything. My phone buzzed again. Not a call this time, just an old message that resurfaced when I scrolled back. Claire had sent it months ago after I covered a repair bill for their car. She wrote that I should not worry, that they had it handled, that it was good to know I was there. Another message followed from a different week. Same tone, same reassurance, different expense. I remembered a conversation from last year, one that had bothered me more than I admitted at the time. We were sitting in my living room, the television on but muted. I had asked carefully whether Andrew's business was starting to support itself yet. I said it casually, the way you ask about the weather. Claire laughed. Not unkindly, just enough to deflect. She said I was being sensitive, that everything was under control, that I worried too much. Andrew looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I apologized then, for asking, for overthinking, for making things awkward. The memory settled heavily in my chest now. I had not been wrong to ask. I had simply been out of step with the role they had quietly assigned me. I gathered the receipts into a neat stack and placed them back into their folders. As I did, a thought came to me with a clarity that surprised me. I had never been forced into this position. No one had demanded my help outright. I had offered it again and again until it became part of the background of their lives. I had not been pressured. I had been presumed. That realization did not come with anger. It came with something steadier, understanding. I had confused being needed with being valued, and the two are not the same. I closed the drawer and stood up. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt expectant. Later that evening, Andrew called. His voice was casual, as if nothing had changed. He asked if I was all right. He said he hoped I understood about the dinner. I told him I was fine. I told him we could talk later. He seemed relieved and said good. That was all. When the call ended, I did not feel the familiar tug to smooth things over. I did not feel the need to reassure him that everything was okay. I sat back down on the bed and looked around the room. The light outside had faded completely now, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to consider what it might mean to stop stepping in before anyone asked. I did not know yet what I would do next. I only knew that whatever came, it would begin with a line I had never drawn before. And that thought, quiet and unresolved, stayed with me as the night settled in. Chapter 3. Morning arrived without ceremony. The thought I carried into sleep had not faded by the time I opened my eyes. It had only settled, becoming heavier in the quiet. I made coffee, dressed slowly, and moved through the house with a focus I had not felt in a long time. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, just a sense that something needed to be done and that I was finally ready to do it. By mid-morning, I was driving across town toward Riverbend Credit Union. I had been a member there for years. Long enough that the building felt familiar, almost neutral. The parking lot was half full. People came and went, carrying envelopes and coffee cups, moving through their days without urgency. It helped ground me. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with cleaner. The line was short. I waited my turn, watching the digital numbers change, listening to the soft murmur of conversation behind the counters. When my number was called, I stepped forward and was directed to a small desk near the windows. James Keller stood to greet me. He was in his early 50s, professional without being stiff, the kind of man who spoke calmly, even when explaining complicated things. He had helped me before, and when he saw me, his expression softened in recognition. He asked how I was doing. I told him I needed to review my accounts. He nodded and gestured for me to sit. The conversation that followed was straightforward. I explained that I wanted to temporarily pause several automatic payments connected to my account. Not close them, not cancel everything, just pause them while I reviewed my finances. James listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. He said that as a precaution, the bank could place a temporary hold on automatic transactions to protect account holders, especially in situations involving shared access. He said it was common. Sensible, not a judgment call. He asked if there was a power of attorney on file. I said yes. He nodded again and explained that revoking it would require additional paperwork, but that access could be limited immediately while the legal steps were completed. It would take a few days. Nothing irreversible, nothing impulsive. I felt my shoulders ease a fraction. James looked at me carefully and asked if everything was all right. I said I was just being thorough. He smiled, the kind that does not press for more. As we went through the forms, he spoke clearly and patiently, making sure I understood each step. He reminded me that I was not doing anything wrong, that reviewing access and pausing payments was a reasonable decision. When everything was submitted, he stood and walked me to the front. Before I left, he paused and said something that stayed with me. He said that when families are accustomed to a certain arrangement, even a temporary change can feel disruptive. He said people often react strongly when access shifts, especially if they are not used to being asked. I thanked him and stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter. Not because the situation was resolved, but because it was finally moving. I had not made it halfway to my car when my phone began to ring. Andrew. I did not answer at first. I let it ring until it stopped, then rang again almost immediately. On the third attempt, I answered. His voice was tight. He asked what was going on with the account. I said I was reviewing my finances. He said he had payments scheduled. He said things were not supposed to be changed without notice. I told him I was allowed to review my own accounts. There was a pause on the line, then a rush of words. He said he did not understand. He said this was going to cause problems. He said Claire was upset. I listened without interrupting. He asked if this was about the dinner. I said it was about me. Another pause. Longer this time. He said that they relied on those funds, that the timing was bad, that I should have talked to him first. I thought about how many times I had been expected to talk first, to check in, to ask permission before offering help. I told him he would need to handle things on his end. He said that was not fair. I said it was necessary. His breathing was audible now, quick and shallow. He said I was overreacting. I looked down at the steering wheel at my hands resting there steady. I said that I was taking care of myself. He said he would call me back. I said that was fine. When he continued speaking, his voice sharper, I interrupted him gently and said I needed to go. Then I ended the call. The silence that followed felt different from the silence the night before. It was not heavy, it was clean. I sat in the car for a few minutes before starting the engine. My chest felt tight, but not with fear, with awareness. I had expected anger, guilt, doubt. What I felt instead was clarity. The speed of Andrew's reaction told me everything I needed to know. The urgency, the panic, the assumption that things would be fixed quickly, quietly by me. I had never named that reliance before. I had softened it, explained it away. Now it stood on its own. Driving home, I noticed small things I usually ignored. A woman walking her dog, a man loading groceries into his trunk. Ordinary lives moving forward without my involvement. By the time I reached my house, the initial rush of adrenaline had faded, leaving something calmer behind. I put my keys on the counter and sat down at the kitchen table. I did not feel triumphant. I felt present. Later that afternoon, Andrew called again. His tone had changed, less frantic, more careful. He said they would figure something out. I told him I believed they would. We ended the call politely. When the house grew quiet again, I realized that for the first time in years, I was not bracing myself for the next request. I was not anticipating the next problem I would need to solve. I was simply waiting. And that pause, unfamiliar and unresolved, felt like the beginning of something I had been postponing for far too long. Chapter 4. The shift did not happen all at once. It arrived in pieces small enough at first that I almost mistook them for concern. The day after the phone calls stopped coming so urgently, my son Mark showed up at my house unannounced. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, scanning the living room, the way people do when they are trying to decide how worried they should be. His wife Allison followed a few steps behind him, her smile practiced and careful. She said they had just been in the neighborhood and thought they would check on me. I let them in. We sat at the dining table where so many conversations had taken place before. Allison folded her hands neatly and leaned forward. She said she had been thinking about me, that the past few days must have been stressful, that she and Mark were concerned I might be overwhelmed. Mark nodded and added that big changes can be confusing, especially at my age. I noticed the way he said it casually, as if he were talking about weather or traffic. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I did not interrupt. Allison reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She placed it on the table between us and slid it closer to me. She said they had spoken with someone who helped families plan ahead. She said it would be smart to make sure everything was organized in case of an emergency. She said it was for my protection. I opened the folder. Inside were forms I recognized enough to know what they were asking for. Authorization to access accounts, medical decision paperwork, language that shifted control quietly but completely. Allison watched my face. She said they were not trying to take anything away from me. She said they just wanted to help manage things so I would not have to worry. I looked at Mark. I asked him if he believed I was incapable of managing my own affairs. He said no, of course not. He said he just thought it would be easier if they handled things together. I asked when together had started meaning without me. The room went quiet. Allison spoke again, her voice softer now. She said I was being defensive. She said stress can make people see problems where there are none. I closed the folder. I told them I would think about it. They left shortly after, relieved, I think, that I had not argued. That relief told me more than any words could have. The next morning, I sat across from attorney Naomi Feldman in her office downtown. The building was modest, the furniture worn but clean. She listened while I explained what had been happening, not interrupting, not rushing me. When I showed her the paperwork, she read through it carefully. She told me signing those documents would give my son and his wife authority to make decisions on my behalf without my consent. She told me that once that control was transferred, it would be difficult to reverse. She asked me if I trusted them completely. I thought about it longer than I expected. I told her no. She nodded once. She said then the answer was simple. I did not need to justify myself. I did not need to apologize. I did not need to soften the decision so it would land better. I left her office with clarity I had not felt in years. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was my grandson, Tyler. He sounded embarrassed, rushing through his words. He said he was behind on rent, that his credit card balance had grown faster than he expected, that he just needed a little help to get through the month. I listened. I told him I could not give him money. There was a pause, heavy and disappointed. I told him I could connect him with a supervisor I knew at a local grocery store that was hiring. Evening shifts, steady hours. He sighed and said that was not what he had hoped for. I told him it was what I could offer, After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while, letting the discomfort settle. This was new. Saying no without explaining myself felt unfamiliar, like using a muscle that had gone unused. Later, I ran into my neighbor Helen in the driveway. She had lived next door for over a decade. She noticed immediately that something was off. I told her a version of the truth. Enough to be honest without oversharing. She listened, then said something simple and unexpected. She said I had done nothing wrong. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. The family meeting happened that weekend at Mark and Allison's house. The children were in another room. The table was cleared except for glasses of water no one touched. I sat across from them, hands folded, feeling strangely calm. I told them I wanted to ask one question. I asked if I was still considered family when I was no longer paying for things. Allison reacted first. She said I was making everything harder than it needed to be. She said the kids were watching. She said my behavior was creating tension. Mark did not answer at all. The silence that followed stretched longer than anyone seemed comfortable with. I waited. I did not fill it. Eventually, Allison looked away. I stood up. I told them I would be going home. As I drove away, sadness came with me, but it did not sit as heavily as I expected. Something had lifted. Something important had been named without being argued into the ground. That night, back in my quiet house, I felt the absence of noise more than the absence of people, and for the first time, the quiet felt like space. Chapter 5. Time moved forward in a way I had almost forgotten it could. Not in leaps or dramatic turns, just steady days stacking quietly on top of one another. By the time spring shifted into early summer, the sharp edge of those first weeks had dulled into something more manageable. My son, Evan, and his wife, Brooke, adjusted in the way people always do when the ground beneath them changes. They sold the newer car and kept the older one. Brooke stopped talking about weekend getaways and started mentioning overtime instead. Evan picked up extra shifts and complained about his back more often. There was no collapse, no public reckoning, just a quieter version of the life they had grown used to. I noticed these changes only because they told me. Not directly and not with accusations, just small comments dropped into conversations as if they were weather reports. Gas prices were high, work was unpredictable, things were tighter than expected. I listened without stepping in. That was the hardest part, not the saying no, but the staying still afterward. A few months after everything settled, my phone buzzed late one afternoon while I was sitting on the back porch with a book I had not opened. The message was from Evan. It was longer than usual, carefully worded, polite. He said he was sorry if things had gone too far. He said he hoped we could talk and clear the air. He said family mattered more than misunderstandings. Then, near the end, he mentioned finances. Not directly, but enough to make the intention clear. Maybe we could revisit things. Maybe there was a middle ground. I read the message once. Then again, I did not feel anger. I did not feel tempted. I felt something close to relief, because the shape of the apology told me everything I needed to know. It was not about understanding. It was about access. I typed a short response. I said I was open to having a relationship that did not revolve around money. I said my financial decisions were not up for discussion. I wished him well. That was it. The reply did not come. The quiet that followed did not feel empty this time. It felt intentional. With the space I had created, other things began to fill in. I took a short trip to the coast by myself. Nothing extravagant. A small inn, a room facing the water, long walks without explaining where I was going or when I would be back. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center and ruined more bowls than I managed to finish. I let myself be bad at something without apologizing. On Tuesday afternoons, I started meeting a group of women at the library for a book discussion. We talked about stories and lives, and the strange relief that comes with growing older and finally understanding your own limits. No one asked what I could offer them. No one needed me to fix anything. One evening, my granddaughter Lily stopped by. She was 19, tall and serious, with a habit of thinking before she spoke. She sat across from me at the kitchen table while I made tea. She said she had noticed things were different. I waited. She said she thought it was brave. I asked her what she meant. She said not everyone realizes they are allowed to change the rules. She said watching me do it made her think about what she wanted for herself later on. Her words caught me off guard. I had spent so long assuming my choices went unnoticed that I forgot how much children see even when they say nothing. I told her I hoped she would never feel like she had to disappear to keep the peace. She nodded as if that was exactly what she needed to hear. After she left, I sat alone at the table long after the tea had gone cold. I thought about how often I had measured my worth by how useful I was to others, how quietly I had accepted that being needed was the same as being loved. It took stepping back to see the difference. No one was ruined by my decision. Evan and Brooke were still standing. The children were still growing. Life continued reshaped, but intact. The only thing that had truly changed was the expectation that I would always be there to soften the consequences. I did not win anything. There was no victory to celebrate. There was just the absence of loss. I had not lost my family. I had only stopped paying for the illusion of belonging. That realization settled into me with a calm that felt earned. These days, my house feels like mine again. The quiet is not something I fill out of habit. It is something I choose. I wake up without bracing myself for the next request. I make plans without checking if they inconvenience anyone else. I exist without explaining. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this: boundaries do not destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were real to begin with. If you have ever found yourself wondering what would happen if you stopped giving more than you could afford, not just in money but in pieces of yourself, you are not alone. Sometimes the most difficult choice is also the one that finally lets you breathe. If this story resonated with you, I would love to know what part stayed with you. Your experiences and reflections matter more than you might think.